early 1950s, somewhere on the cold, windswept outskirts of Moscow. You are standing inside a small utilitarian building. The air is a strange cocktail of smells. The sharp, metallic scent of disinfectant fails to completely cover the musty animal odor of a kennel. A low, constant whirring sound hums from a piece of machinery in the corner, a monotonous drone beneath the sudden, anxious barks echoing from another room. This is a state-funded Soviet laboratory, a place of stark contrasts. For the people working here, it is a hub of world-changing ambition. For the animals living here, it is a place of profound confusion and uncertainty. This is the world of Vladimir Demikhov, a man history would remember as a brilliant surgeon, a visionary pioneer, and the creator of monsters. Welcome to the dawn of transplantology. Your guide on this journey is a man of immense contradiction. In one moment, you see a humble man born to a peasant family, so poor that as a university student, he had to have a shirt and tie drawn onto his photograph because he couldn't afford to buy them. He is quiet, focused, and according to those who knew him, possessed an almost unnerving intensity. This is the man who, while still a student in 1937, designed and built the world's first artificial heart, keeping a dog alive with it for over 2 hours. This same man served as a frontline pathologist during the Second World War, his lack of a formal medical degree overshadowed by his sheer expertise. For the soldiers he examined, his work was a grim necessity of war. For Demikhov, it was an unparalleled education in human anatomy. Now, in his own laboratory, his morning routine begins. You watch as he moves from the surgical theatre to the adjoining room, the source of the barking. Here, in crude animal pens, are the subjects for the day's work. The conditions are clean but basic, a world away from a modern facility. There is no gentle music, no enrichment toys, just concrete floors and metal bars. He moves with a calm and methodical purpose that is deeply unsettling. His eyes scan the pens, not with the warmth of an animal lover, but with the cool appraisal of an engineer assessing components. The dogs, a mix of strays and purpose-bred animals, fall silent as he approaches, their instincts telling them this human is different. His work would force a difficult question upon the world, one we still wrestle with today. Was this pioneering science, or was it monstrous cruelty? The selection is made. You see 2 dogs being led from the pens. One is a large, healthy German shepherd, referred to in notes as Brodiaga or tramp. He seems relatively calm, accustomed to the presence of the lab technicians. The other is a much smaller puppy, a playful mutt named Shavka. She seems curious, her tail giving a few hopeful thumps against the leg of her handler. They are unaware that they are about to become part of an experiment that will make Demikhov infamous. To the world, this would become the 2-headed dog experiment. To Demikhov, it was just another step in a logical progression, a necessary exploration into the very limits of life and surgery. For the 2 dogs, it was the start of a journey into a shared nightmarish existence from which there was no return. You follow them into the operating theatre. The room is sparse, and surprisingly, it is what the room lacks that tells the most important story. In this place, a man who would perform some of history's most audacious surgeries had almost no modern technology. You look around and see no cardiopulmonary bypass machine to oxygenate the blood during a procedure. There is no defibrillator to shock a heart back into rhythm. There are no sophisticated anticoagulants, no surgical microscopes for delicate work. The lab is a testament to an era before the machines took over. Success here relied on something else entirely. It was a place where progress was measured not in computational power, but in the skill of human hands. The procedure begins with an eerie calm. The 2 dogs, Brodiaga and Shavka, are gently guided onto adjacent operating tables. You hear the soft hiss of the anesthetic being administered. Slowly, their bodies relax, their breathing becomes deep and regular, and the room falls into a profound silence. The only sounds now are the quiet, methodical clinking of surgical instruments and the low, murmured commands of Demikhov to his small team. He moves without any visible sign of stress or hesitation. To you, an observer, the task ahead seems impossible. a violation of natural law. To Demikhov, it was a technical problem to be solved, a challenge of plumbing and physiological wiring. His genius, born from necessity, was in his exceptional dexterity and his incredible surgical speed. He had to work faster than nature could claim the delicate tissues on his table. His goal on this day in February 1954 was not simply to transplant an organ. He had already done that. Years earlier, working on other animals, he had performed the world's first successful heart-lung transplant, the first lung transplant, and the first liver transplant. He even performed the first experimental coronary artery bypass in 1953, the very procedure that would one day save millions of human lives. He coined the word transplantology to describe his emerging field, but those incredible achievements were about to be overshadowed. His goal today was far more ambitious. He wasn't just replacing a part, he was creating a chimera, a single living creature with two independent minds. The first incision is made. You watch as Demikhov works on the neck of the larger host dog Brodiaga. His hands move with a fluid precision that is mesmerizing. He carefully exposes the carotid artery and the jugular vein, the vital pipelines that carry blood to and from the brain. There is no wasted movement, no hesitation. This is a man with a perfect mental map of the anatomy before him. While one part of his team assists, another begins preparing the donor puppy, Shavka. The air in the room is cool, but you feel a bead of sweat on your own brow. For the surgeons, this was a practiced, almost routine act, honed over more than 20 previous attempts. For you, it feels like watching a sacred boundary being crossed. Now, the most critical part of the process begins for the puppy, Shavka. Her lower body is amputated just below her forelegs. But here is where Demikhov's unique genius comes into play. In a crucial innovation, he keeps the puppy's own heart and lungs attached and functioning for as long as possible. You see the tiny chest continuing to rise and fall. This brilliant technique dramatically reduces the time the brain is deprived of oxygenated blood, a problem that had doomed all earlier attempts by other researchers. He was in a race against cellular death, and this was his secret weapon. He was not just a butcher, he was a master of preserving life, even as he was redefining its form. The next phase is a blur of motion. It is called vascular anastomosis, the connection of the blood vessels. This is the moment everything depends on. The head, shoulders, and forelegs of the puppy are lifted and moved into position over the host dog's neck. Using a surgical stapling machine of his own invention, Demikhov swiftly connects the puppy's blood vessels to the exposed vessels of the German Shepherd. It's a stunning display of speed and accuracy. He is knitting together two separate circulatory systems, creating a shared river of life between two beings. The entire unbelievably complex operation could be completed in as little as 3.5 hours, a feat of surgical stamina and skill that is difficult to comprehend even today. Once the vascular connections are secure, the final grim step is taken. You watch as the team checks the flow of blood from the host's heart into the newly attached head. It is working. The tissues of the puppy's head are now being fed by the powerful heart of the German Shepherd. Only then are Shavka's own tiny heart and lungs finally cut away and removed. Her existence is now fully dependent on the body of another. To provide support, her vertebrae are carefully attached to the host dog's neck, a crude but effective piece of biological scaffolding. The surgical site is closed, the two bodies now permanently joined. The team steps back, their work done. All that is left is to wait. The anesthetic slowly wears off. The first to stir is the host dog, Brodiaga. He lifts his heavy head, his eyes blinking in confusion. You can see the moment he becomes aware of the new, unaccountable weight on his neck. He tries to shake it off, a natural reaction to a bizarre and unwelcome addition, but it doesn't move. It is a part of him now. Then, something even more unsettling happens. The grafted head of the puppy, Shavka, also begins to awaken. Her eyes open. She lets out a wide, groggy yawn. She looks around the room, her consciousness fully intact. She is alive. A living, breathing chimera now lies on the table, a horrifying and miraculous testament to one man's relentless ambition. The team observes, their faces impassive, taking notes on the creature they have just willed into existence. The two heads, you quickly realize, possess separate consciousness, yet are trapped within a single physiology. They are two distinct personalities in one body. You observe their bizarre coexistence in the days that follow. When the laboratory gets warm, both the large head of Brodiaga and the small head of Shavka begin to pant, their tongues lolling out to cool the single body they now share. When the host dog becomes thirsty and is given water, the puppy head also shows signs of thirst, eagerly lapping milk from a separate bowl. It's a heartbreaking sight because the puppy's esophagus isn't connected to the host's stomach. Any milk she drinks simply spills out from an external drainage tube onto the floor. She can feel the satisfaction of drinking, but never the relief of a full stomach. Through it all, they retain their individual personalities. Evidence suggests that, at first, the arrangement was difficult. In one famous account reported by Time magazine, the playful puppy head of Shavka gave the larger host dog's ear a playful, or perhaps irritated, nip. The German shepherd, Brodiaga, responded with an annoyed snarl. You can only imagine the sheer confusion for the host dog, suddenly tethered to a smaller, more impulsive companion. Yet, somehow, they managed. Over time, reports say the host dog would become reconciled to its new reality. Demikhov himself admitted it likely felt, in his understated words, some kind of inconvenience. For these animals, life had become a constant, inescapable negotiation with another being literally attached to their neck. Don't worry, their strange life together was always temporary. The creations were doomed from the start by a force that Demikhov's surgical skill could not conquer, biology itself. The longest surviving of these two-headed dogs lived for 29 days. This was a remarkable achievement, but an outlier among many others that perished much sooner from complications. The ultimate cause of death was almost always the same: massive tissue rejection. The host dog's immune system would eventually recognize the grafted head and shoulders as a foreign invader and launch a relentless attack against it. It was a war waged on a cellular level, a battle that the surgically joined pair could never win. In the end, this experiment left the world with a profound and uncomfortable legacy. On one hand, it was a grotesque spectacle, an act that many viewed as the peak of scientific hubris and animal cruelty. On the other hand, the techniques Demikhov perfected, his methods for connecting blood vessels and preserving organs, directly paved the way for the era of human organ transplantation. Every successful heart or lung transplant performed today owes a small, unacknowledged debt to these bizarre experiments in a small lab outside Moscow. So next time you hear about the wonders of modern transplant surgery, remember its strange and unsettling beginnings. Remember Brodiaga and Shavka, the two dogs who were surgically joined into a single, tragic being, all in the name of progress. And so, with the unsettling stage now set within Demikhov's state-funded laboratory, we'll pause our investigation for just a moment. We've peered into the operating theatre as the anaesthetic takes hold, and if you're still watching, you're a true student of history's darker corners. The journey ahead, however, only grows stranger. Soon, we will witness the conscious eyes of a monkey's head following its new doctors around a lab in America, and untangle the threads of how these living chimeras became potent propaganda in the scientific theatre of the Cold War. It is a legacy that, while chilling, I trust we can examine from the safety of the present. If you wish to continue this exploration into the limits of science and ethics, consider leaving a like on this report and subscribe to the channel to ensure you're scrubbed in for the next phase of the experiment. For now, take a deep breath. The most infamous procedure is about to begin. Imagine, it's the 1920s in Soviet Russia. The air itself feels heavy, saturated with the recent memory of immense loss from war and famine. You walk through streets where the ghosts of a recent, brutal past still linger on every corner. In this world, the line between life and death feels terrifyingly thin. This national trauma created a unique obsession, a collective desire to conquer death itself. For scientists of the era, this wasn't just a fantasy, it was a national project. Revolutionary enthusiasm wasn't just for building a new society, but for scientifically remaking the very definition of life. Now, imagine you are in a laboratory in the midst of this fervor. The room is probably cold, with a sharp, sterile scent that fails to cover the underlying odor of biological experiments. Here, a scientist named Sergei Brukhanenko is working on something radical. He's responding to this cultural moment, building on a long history of European research into keeping organs alive outside the body. You see, before anyone could dream of transplanting a head, someone first had to prove a complex organ could even be sustained artificially. This was the foundational and frankly horrifying first step. Brukhanenko was the man to take it, driven by the anxieties and ambitions of his time. Welcome to the world of the autojector. Between 1922 and 1924, Brukhanenko developed this machine. It looks primitive to your modern eyes, a strange assembly of pumps and tubes. It's essentially the world's first heart-lung machine. You can hear the rhythmic pulse of its diaphragm pumps, a mechanical heartbeat circulating and oxygenating blood. This machine, the direct ancestor of the technology that makes open-heart surgery possible today, was about to be used for something far stranger. It was designed to provide the conceptual proof needed for even more audacious experiments down the line. The most infamous application of this device is something you might struggle to watch. On a sterile lab tray sits a severed dog's head. It's a surreal, deeply unsettling sight. Tubes run from the quietly humming autojector into the major vessels of its neck. The machine is pumping warm, oxygenated blood through its brain. The head is, for all intents and purposes, alive. You watch as a lab assistant makes a loud noise. The head flinches, its eyes blink slowly. When a researcher dabs some citric acid on its mouth, the tongue emerges and licks its own chops. The scientific purpose was to study physiology, but the result was a spectacle of eerie vitality that would lay the groundwork for decades of research. This unbelievable scene was not kept secret. In 1940, it was broadcast to the world in a Soviet propaganda film called Experiments in the Revival of Organisms. Imagine sitting in a London cinema, the black and white footage flickering before you. The film, narrated by a respected British scientist, purports to show these revivals in real time. For audiences in the West, it was shocking proof that biological impossibilities were becoming possible. But here's the thing, the truth was a little more complicated. Evidence suggests the film was a carefully staged piece of propaganda. The head was likely only responsive for a few minutes, not hours. The film was a performance designed to project an image of Soviet scientific power. It was this legacy of shocking spectacle and surgical ambition that another scientist, Vladimir Demikhov, would inherit. Now, let's jump forward to the 1950s. You are in a different Soviet laboratory, but the atmosphere is just as intense. The air still has that sharp antiseptic smell, but it's mixed with the warm, musky scent of dogs. The quiet hum you hear isn't from Brukhanenko's autojector, but from more advanced equipment. This is the domain of Vladimir Demikhov, and he is about to take the next logical, if terrifying, step. He wasn't just trying to keep a head alive on a tray, he was going to give it a new body. This brings us to his most famous and unsettling creation, the two-headed dog. Imagine the plan laid out before you on a diagram. The concept is audacious. You'll take the head, shoulders, and front paws of a small puppy and graft them onto the neck of a large, healthy adult German Shepherd. The goal isn't just to attach it like a macabre decoration. The goal is to make it live. You can feel the sheer scale of the surgical challenge just by looking at the schematics. This wasn't a crude attachment, it was a symphony of microscopic sutures and delicate connections, a feat of surgical artistry that pushed the known boundaries of medicine. Let's break down the procedure, because its complexity is where the real genius and horror lies. First, you have to manage the blood flow. You would need to meticulously connect the puppy's arteries and veins to the circulatory system of the host dog. Imagine the steady hands required to suture the tiny carotid artery of the puppy to the powerful carotid of the German Shepherd. One mistake, one leak, and the experiment is over before it begins. The host dog's powerful heart would now be responsible for pumping blood to two brains, its lungs providing oxygen for two separate consciousnesses. But the vascular system is only part of the problem. For the second head to be more than a passive observer, parts of the spinal column had to be connected. While a full spinal cord transplant was impossible, Demikhov managed to join enough of the vertebrae to provide physical stability. You can picture the surgeons working for hours under bright lights, the metallic click of forceps and clamps the only sound. Through it all, the host dog's body would act as a life support system for the transplanted head, providing everything it needed to function. Somehow, they managed to pull it off, creating a single, bizarre organism from two separate beings. The sheer audacity of the surgery is hard to overstate. Every single step was a venture into the unknown. There were no textbooks for this, no guides to follow. You were writing the book as you went along. Each successful connection, from the jugular vein to the thoracic duct, was a small victory in a much larger, ethically ambiguous war against nature. This surgical triumph, the ability to create a stable, living chimera, was the moment of success. But the real test, the truly unsettling part, would come when the anesthesia wore off. What would you do when your creation opened its eyes? Imagine you are there in the recovery room. It's quiet, save for the soft panting of the host dog. The air is warm and smells faintly of iodine and fur. You are watching a grainy, black and white film of the results, but in your mind's eye, it's happening right in front of you. A large German shepherd is lying on a blanket, dazed from the anesthetic, and rising from just behind its own head is the complete head and shoulders of a small, light-coloured puppy. For a moment, nothing happens. It's just a deeply strange, motionless sculpture of flesh and bone. Then, it begins. This is the horrifying moment of success. The puppy's head begins to stir. Its tiny nose twitches. You watch, holding your breath, as its eyes slowly blink open. They are unfocused at first, but then they seem to gain some awareness. A wave of profound unease might wash over you. It's one thing to see it in a diagram, it's another to see it live and breathe. The puppy lets out a wide, wet yawn, its tiny pink tongue curling. The sight is so mundane, so normal, yet in this context, it's one of the most unnatural things you have ever witnessed. The scientists, to test its functions, present the puppy head with a bowl of milk. You watch, transfixed, as it eagerly laps at the liquid, swallowing and seemingly enjoying the taste. It responds to stimuli completely independently of the host dog. It will follow a researcher's finger with its eyes. It will prick up its ears at a sudden sound. Then comes an even more shocking display of its independent will. When a lab assistant prods it, the puppy head reacts with a snarl and attempts to bite the offending hand. This is not a passive appendage, it is a conscious, feeling creature. But what about the other head? Picture the host dog, the German shepherd. It's a study in confusion and distress. You can see it in its eyes. It occasionally tries to turn its head, to look at the strange weight on its neck. It might try to shake it off, like a dog trying to get rid of an uncomfortable collar. But this is a collar with its own mind. The host dog appears passive, perhaps sedated, but its quiet panting and bewildered glances tell a story of silent suffering. You can't help but wonder what it must feel like to be a prisoner in your own body, tethered to another consciousness. The entire scene, captured on that grainy film, feels like a nightmare brought to life. The success of the surgery is undeniable. Demikhov proved it could be done. He had created a living, breathing, two-headed dog. But as you watch the puppy head yawn again while the host dog stares blankly into space, you realize that a surgical triumph can also be a profound biological tragedy. The lab is filled with a quiet sense of scientific achievement, but for you, the air is thick with a chilling ethical fog that is impossible to ignore. Now, let's look past the initial shocking success. In the sterile quiet of the Soviet lab, the two-headed dogs were a marvel of surgical skill. For a few precious days, or sometimes even weeks, they lived. The puppy head would drink, the host dog would eat, and for a brief moment, it seemed like the impossible had been made routine. You can imagine the researchers carefully logging every observation, every twitch, and every bark, feeling they were on the cusp of a new era. But this success was always fleeting. There was a biological clock ticking down, and it was ticking very, very fast. The inevitable end came not from a failure of surgery, but from a force of nature far more powerful. The problem was tissue rejection. You can graft a head on, but you can't trick a body into accepting it. The host dog's immune system, a complex and ancient defense mechanism, would eventually recognize the puppy's head and shoulders as a foreign invader. Your own body does the same thing with a splinter or a virus. The German shepherd's body mounted a massive attack against the foreign tissues, treating the second head like a hostile parasite. You can almost feel the slow, tragic decline. The area around the graft would become inflamed and swollen. The puppy head, once alert and active, would grow lethargic. It would lose its appetite, refusing the milk it once lapped up so eagerly. Its breathing would become shallow. The host dog would also sicken. its body exhausted by the constant internal battle. Despite the researchers' best efforts, there was no stopping it. In the 1950s, the understanding of immunology was still in its infancy. They had no effective immunosuppressant drugs to calm the host's furious biological rejection. The lifespan of these creations was heartbreakingly short. Most of the 22-headed dogs Demikhov created lived for only a few days. The most successful pair survived for just 29 days. In the end, after all the brilliant surgery and careful post-operative care, the fundamental laws of biology always won. You can picture the quiet disappointment in the lab as another experiment ended, another creature succumbing to rejection. Through it all, they had proven that the surgery was possible, but they had also proven that long-term survival was not. So, the next time you hear about a successful organ transplant, a heart or a kidney that gives someone a new lease on life, you can think back to these strange, sad creatures. Demikhov's work, for all its disturbing qualities, highlighted the single greatest obstacle in all of transplantation: the immune system. His experiments were a surgical triumph, but a biological failure, and in that failure, they paved the way for the development of the immunosuppressant drugs that make modern transplants possible. Don't worry, science has moved on, but it did so by learning hard lessons from these ghostly, two-headed pioneers. The story of transplanting vital organs doesn't start with the famous experiments of the 1950s. To understand how we get to a dog with two heads, you have to travel back further. Welcome to the Soviet Union in the 1920s, a time of immense upheaval and radical new ideas. It's here you meet a man named Sergei Brukhanenko. He wasn't just a scientist, he was a pioneer with a question that seemed to come from fiction. Could a part of a creature, an organ or even a head, continue to live all by itself, completely separated from the body? In his laboratory in the 1920s, you'd find a strange collection of glass tubes, pumps and wiring. The air inside feels cool and sterile, smelling sharply of chemicals meant to clean everything. You can hear the quiet, rhythmic sloshing of fluids and the gentle hum of early electrical devices. For the people working here, this was the frontier of biology. They were attempting to sustain life in a way no one had ever successfully done before, challenging the very definition of what it meant for something to be alive. Your own understanding of life and death feels questioned in a place like this. Brukhanenko's early work focused on isolated organs. Imagine you see a living heart, disconnected from any animal, yet still beating rhythmically inside a glass container. He managed this by creating a system to supply it with everything it needed. This wasn't just a party trick, it was a profound scientific pursuit. His research laid the absolute foundation for what would later become life support systems. For the ordinary person, the idea was almost unthinkable, a story you might tell to frighten children. But for Brukhanenko, it was just another day at the office. The goal was always bigger than just a single organ. The ultimate test of his theory would be something far more complex, something with demonstrable consciousness. The team set their sights on the head of a dog. In this period of scientific ambition, you can see how the goal was to prove mastery over nature itself. The quiet, focused work in this lab was building towards a demonstration that would shock the entire world. It was a slow, methodical process, with each small success bringing them closer to a truly unsettling breakthrough that would change medicine forever. Your perception of what is possible begins to shift in this environment. Now, to keep a severed head alive, you need a replacement for the body. You need something that does the work of the heart and the lungs. In his workshop, filled with the scent of oil and hot metal, Brukhanenko built his solution. He called it the autojector. This device was essentially the world's first primitive machine for the heart and lungs. It was a complex and unwieldy assembly of pumps, chambers, and rubber diaphragms, all designed to do one thing: mimic the functions of a living torso. It was the key to everything. Imagine you are standing beside this strange contraption in the 1920s. The autojector is loud, a constant symphony of mechanical humming and rhythmic clicking. You watch as clear rubber tubes carry dark, deoxygenated blood away from an organ, and another set of tubes returns blood brightened to a vivid cherry red. The machine physically warms the blood to the correct body temperature and infuses it with oxygen. For the scientists of the time, this machine was a miracle. It allowed them to create a completely artificial circulatory system, a life support loop outside the body. Your awe is mixed with a little bit of unease. The process itself was a delicate and grim ballet. First, a dog's head would be surgically removed. Then, With incredible speed, its major arteries and veins, the carotid artery and the jugular vein, were connected to the autojector's tubes. You see the team working with intense focus, knowing every second is critical. The machine would be switched on, and its pumps would begin to push the specially prepared oxygenated blood into the brain. The impact on the scientific community would be immense, as this proved that a complex part of a mammal could be sustained artificially. Don't worry, the science had a purpose, even if it seems grotesque. The whole point was to prove that life, or at least the processes of life, could be maintained mechanically. This was the foundational research that would one day lead to modern open-heart surgery. Before a surgeon can stop a patient's heart to repair it, you need a machine that can take over the job of circulating blood. The loud, crude autojector you see in this lab is the great-grandfather of the quiet, sophisticated life support machines in hospitals today. Somehow, they managed to turn this shocking idea into a cornerstone of medicine. In 1928, the world finally saw what Brokhanenko had achieved. He and his team documented their work in a film, a silent black and white recording that would become infamous. Picture this: you are in a dimly lit auditorium. The only sound is the whirring of the film projector. On the screen, an image flickers into view that is difficult to process. It is a dog's head sitting upright on a white tray, connected by a few rubber tubes to the noisy autojector just off screen. The head is not a lifeless specimen, it is very clearly alive. The film continues, providing undeniable proof of life. As you watch, a technician strikes a metal tool near the head, creating a loud noise. The head visibly flinches, its ears twitching in response. The eyes blink. Then, another scientist uses a cotton swab to dab a bit of acid onto the dog's lips. The head reacts instantly, its tongue emerging to lick the substance away, its face contorting in distaste. The scene is both scientifically triumphant and deeply unsettling for anyone watching. Your mind struggles to reconcile the image of a living head with the absence of its body. The most famous part of the demonstration comes next. A researcher holds out a small piece of cheese. The head's eyes follow the cheese. When it's placed in the mouth, the head chews it and swallows. Of course, without a stomach, the chewed cheese simply pops out of the esophageal tube on the other side and falls back onto the tray. This moment, more than any other, cemented the experiment in the public imagination. It was undeniable proof that the brain was not only alive, but performing complex, conscious functions. This was a spectacle of Soviet science asserting its power. But here's the thing, this film wasn't just a scientific record. In the context of the growing ideological struggle that would become the Cold War, it was a statement. Evidence suggests that Soviet leadership saw immense propaganda value in this kind of work. You can almost feel the political weight behind the images on the screen. It sent a message to the world, a message that Soviet science was bold, unflinching, and capable of conquering the very boundaries of life and death. The human impact was clear. It positioned Soviet researchers as masters of nature, unafraid to go where others would not dare. The truth was, this wasn't purely for shock value. The purpose of keeping a severed head alive was to study the processes of the brain and the circulatory system in isolation. In that sterile laboratory, surrounded by the hum of his machine, Brokhanenko was answering fundamental questions. How does the brain react to changes in blood pressure or oxygen levels? What does it need to survive? Your ability to even ask these questions in a controlled way depended on his invention. This research was the bedrock for developing the heart-lung machines that make modern cardiac surgery possible. This early work set the stage for Vladimir Demikhov's more famous experiments decades later. Brokhanenko's autojector proved that you could keep a complex body part alive artificially. Demikhov would take that principle and apply it to transplantation, connecting that living head not to a machine, but to the circulatory system of another living animal. Through it all, the methodology was passed down. The unsettling images of Brokhanenko's work paved the way for the even more shocking images of Demikhov's creations. The impact on the future of surgery was simply enormous. When news and films of these Soviet experiments eventually reached the West, the reaction was predictably one of fascinated horror. Mainstream publications, like a 1955 article in Time magazine, described the work as sensational and bizarre. For many in the public and even the Western medical establishment, it was dismissed as unethical quackery. You can imagine a doctor in America in the 1950s reading about it and shaking his head, thinking it was just morbid propaganda from behind the Iron Curtain. Yet, below the surface of public condemnation, something else was happening. The world's leading surgeons were paying very close attention. In their professional circles, they could look past the strange application and see the sheer genius of the surgical techniques. According to historians, Demikhov's book on the subject became required reading, translated into multiple languages. By the early 1960s, top American surgeons were traveling to the Soviet Union specifically to learn from these doctors. In the end, the very work the West publicly rejected as monstrous was quietly absorbed, helping to turn the fantasy of human organ transplantation into a real, life-saving procedure. So next time you hear about organ donation, you can remember its strange, complicated roots in a Soviet lab with a living head on a tray. Late 1950s, the entire world seems to be holding its breath. You can almost feel the tension in the air, a low static hum beneath the noise of daily life. It's a strange time to be alive. You look up at the sky, and for the first time in human history, you know something man-made is circling up there, a tiny, beeping sphere called Sputnik. The sound of its radio signal, a simple and steady pulse, is broadcast into your home. It feels both miraculous and deeply unsettling. This little ball of metal represents a new kind of power, a new kind of race. For you and millions of others, it changes how you see the world and your place in it. Now, imagine you're a scientist living in the Soviet Union during this exact period. You feel an immense pressure on your shoulders, a weight that is both exhilarating and terrifying. Every morning, you walk into your laboratory. The air is thick with the smell of antiseptic and hot vacuum tubes. The floors are cold and unforgiving under your feet. Your government is not just asking for discoveries, it is demanding them. The state needs proof of its superiority. It needs things that are bigger, bolder, and more shocking than anything the West can produce. The space race is the most visible front in this new war, but it's not the only one. Down on the ground, far from the launch pads and rocket gantries, another race is underway. This one is quieter, fought not with rockets, but with scalpels and sutures. You hear whispers in the sterile hallways about the work of men like Vladimir Demikhov. The state is pouring resources into his research. While American scientists are celebrated for developing things like the polio vaccine, your leaders want something more dramatic. They want a symbol of total mastery. This intense pressure trickles down to everyone, shaping every project and every ambition. You understand that your work is no longer just about science, it's about sending a message. This new kind of science wasn't about gentle progress, it was about loud, undeniable spectacle. In this tense global theatre, every discovery became a performance. You and your colleagues are told that your work will demonstrate the power of the Soviet system. The goal isn't just to understand nature, but to command it. You feel the chill of this demand every time you review your notes. The fate of your career, and perhaps more, depends on producing results that will capture the world's imagination or its horror. Through it all, you know you are a soldier in a war of ideas, and your lab is the battlefield. Welcome to Moscow. It's a city of grand promises and stark realities. You walk past apartment blocks, the air smelling of damp concrete and coal smoke. You see the propaganda posters plastered on the walls. They show smiling workers, bountiful harvests, and gleaming new rockets. These images tell a story of a future that is bright and scientifically managed. As an ordinary citizen, you are constantly surrounded by these symbols of state power. They are meant to make you feel proud, to feel part of something vast and historic. Your life is shaped by the narrative the state chooses to tell. Now, a new image enters this official story. You see it in a state-approved newspaper or a grainy newsreel at the cinema. The picture is confusing at first. It shows a dog, but something is wrong. There is another head, a smaller one, grafted onto its shoulders. You see this creature living, breathing, even drinking milk. The narrator's voice is firm and proud, explaining this is not a monster, but a miracle. This is the work of Vladimir Demikhov, a triumph of Soviet science. You sit in the dark theatre, the projector whirring softly behind you, trying to understand what this means. This two-headed dog is presented to you as a powerful piece of propaganda. It's a living, walking symbol of mastery over life itself. The message is simple and profound. If Soviet science can conquer the boundaries of the body, what can't it do? If it can join two living beings into one, surely it can build the perfect society. You look at the screen, at the strange animal lapping water from a bowl with both of its heads. The image is designed to bypass your reason and go straight to a sense of awe and power. It's a very effective way to show the world that the USSR is at the cutting edge of creation. The truth was, this was a carefully constructed spectacle. For people in the Soviet Union, it was another sign that their system was on the verge of perfecting the world. You might feel a mix of pride and a quiet, unnameable discomfort. This experiment feels like it has crossed a line, but you are told it is the future. It's proof that science, guided by the correct ideology, can overcome any obstacle. So next time you see a poster of a rocket, you also think of this strange dog. You are left with the lingering idea that your leaders are not just masters of steel and politics, but of flesh and blood as well. Imagine you are a diplomat stationed in a Western embassy in Moscow. Your job is to read between the lines of Soviet life. You spend your days in rooms that feel heavy, the air thick with the faint scent of cigar smoke and suspicion. You listen to the official radio broadcasts and read the translations of Pravda. You are trained to look for the subtext, for the real message behind the propaganda. You are used to reports about tractor production and 5-year plans. Then, one day, a very different kind of report lands on your desk. It contains blurry photographs of a dog with 2 heads. The Soviet state promoted this work with incredible intensity. For them, it was more than a surgical curiosity. It was proof that they could conquer nature. It was a demonstration of their philosophical belief that everything, even life, was just matter to be understood and reconfigured. You read the translated articles and the language is bold, almost biblical. They speak of mastering the organism sign and overcoming biological limits. For you, living in a world still grappling with the ethics of organ donation, this sounds like something from a science fiction novel. It directly challenges your fundamental ideas about life and identity. This wasn't just about showing off a new surgical technique, it was about creating a symbol. The 2-headed dog was a living monument to the idea that the Soviet system could engineer a new reality. They presented it as a step towards conquering death itself. If a head could live on another body, then perhaps consciousness could be preserved indefinitely. You lean back in your worn leather chair, the cold Moscow air seeping in through the window frame. The implications are staggering. It suggests a future where the state has the ultimate power, the power to grant or extend life. For you as an observer, the experiment is a chilling success. It achieves exactly what the Soviet propaganda machine wanted it to. It creates a story of power that is hard to ignore. It's designed to be shocking, to make the West seem cautious and slow by comparison. The image of that dog is meant to plant a seed of doubt in your mind about the limits of what is possible. And as you file your report back to your home country, you know that this strange story from a Moscow laboratory will cause a significant stir. Don't worry, the West was definitely paying attention. The break's free. Let's travel back across the Iron Curtain. You are now a surgeon in London or New York in the early 1960s. You pick up your morning copy of the Times, or you see a report in a medical journal. The paper feels crisp and cool in your hands. You read the story about the Soviet experiments, about a dog with 2 heads kept alive for days. Your first reaction is probably one of professional disgust. It seems barbaric, a grotesque stunt with no real medical application for humans. Your world is one of careful, incremental progress, of ethics boards and painstaking peer review. The public reaction in the West was overwhelmingly one of horror. Newspapers and magazines used words like monstrous and unethical. Animal welfare groups were of course horrified. To the average person, it looked like a cruel and pointless exercise in political showmanship. You and your colleagues in the medical community publicly condemn the work. At conferences and in official statements, you dismiss it as sensationalism, not serious science. It seems to violate the core principle you hold dear, to first do no harm. But here's the thing. Behind closed doors, the reaction was more complicated. In the quiet of your study, surrounded by the familiar smell of old books and pipe tobacco, you look at the reports again. You feel a grudging admiration. Putting aside the ethical questions for a moment, you are forced to confront the sheer technical skill involved. How did they manage the blood supply? How did they control for rejection? The Soviets had published some of their methods, and you study the diagrams with a professional's eye. You see a level of surgical audacity that is almost unthinkable in your own restrained environment. And so, a strange duality emerged. The experiments were publicly condemned but secretly studied. Western intelligence agencies and medical researchers gathered every scrap of information they could find about Demikhov's techniques. While the press called it a circus act, scientists recognized a breakthrough in vascular surgery that could, in theory, be applied elsewhere. The truth was, the Soviets had thrown down a gauntlet. They had shown that something thought impossible could be done. And in the competitive chill of the Cold War, you know that someone, somewhere in the West, will eventually feel compelled to pick it up. The story, however, does not end in the cold laboratories of Moscow. Like a strange scientific relay, the torch of head transplantation was passed across the ocean. Welcome to the United States in the late 1960s. The air is thick with change, and the scientific competition of the Cold War is reaching a fever pitch. In this new setting, you meet a new protagonist, Dr. Robert J. White. He was a brilliant and respected American neurosurgeon, a man who spent his days performing delicate operations on the human brain. You are in a bustling American hospital, a world away from Demikhov's secretive institute. The floors are polished, the smell of antiseptic is sharp and clean, and the technology feels a generation ahead. Here, Dr. White is a star. He has dedicated his life to understanding the brain, but his interest went far beyond just healing it. He held a profound belief, one that would guide his most controversial work. For him, the brain was everything. It was the absolute essence of you, the source of your thoughts, your memories, your very soul. The body, in his view, was just a shell, a biological machine, or casing designed to carry the brain around. This philosophy put him on a direct collision course with the biggest challenge in medicine. If the body was just a support system, what could you do for someone whose body had failed them completely, perhaps through paralysis or organ failure? Could you save the person by giving them a new body? You can see the logic forming in his mind, a train of thought that leads to a chilling conclusion. He wasn't just aware of Vladimir Demikhov's work, he was inspired by it. He saw the two-headed dogs not as monsters, but as a proof of concept. Demikhov had shown that a head could be kept alive on a foreign body. Now, White wanted to take the next logical step. He didn't want to just graft a second head onto a body. He wanted to perform a total replacement. Imagine your entire sense of self, everything that makes you you, being lifted from your failing body and placed onto a new, healthy one. This was Dr. White's ultimate goal. In his Ohio laboratory, he began to gather his team and his resources. The sounds of progress were the same as in Moscow, the clinking of surgical tools and the quiet hum of machinery. But the goal was somehow even more ambitious. It was a plan to rescue the mind by discarding the body entirely. This journey would secure his place in history, but not perhaps in the way he intended. The world was about to see what happens when American ambition and medical genius are applied to the most unsettling question of all. Where do you end and the rest of your body begin? Let's go to the year 1970. You are now inside Dr. White's laboratory at the Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. It is sterile and cold, the air chilled by early air conditioning systems that hum a constant low drone. The light from the overhead surgical lamps is intensely bright, reflecting off the stainless steel tables and instruments. Your senses are filled with the clinical smells of alcohol and iodine, a scent meant to promise cleanliness and safety. This is where the culmination of years of theory would become a grim reality. Dr. White is preparing for his landmark experiment. The goal is a full cephalic exchange, a head transplant between two rhesus monkeys. You watch as the two animals are prepared. One is the donor, the head that will be saved. The other is the recipient, the body that will be used. The procedure requires a level of precision that is difficult to fathom. Every artery, every vein must be carefully identified, severed, and prepared for reattachment. The pressure on the surgical team is immense, a silent tension that you can feel in the stillness of the room. A single mistake could ruin everything. But Dr. White has a key technique, a modern advantage that Demikhov lacked. It's a process called cerebral hypothermia. Imagine taking the monkey's head and carefully lowering its temperature, cooling the brain down to about 15 degrees Celsius or 59 degrees Fahrenheit. You can feel the cold seeping into the room as the cooling systems are activated. This profound chill slows the brain's metabolism to a crawl, protecting it from oxygen deprivation during the transfer. It's a critical window of time, a manufactured pause that allows the surgeons to perform their impossible task. Through it all, the team somehow manages this delicate dance of biology and technology. The surgery itself takes hours. It's a slow, methodical process. You hear the soft snip of surgical scissors and the quiet commands of Dr. White guiding his team. The most critical moment arrives when the spinal cord must be severed. There is no technology yet, no magic bullet, to fuse a spinal cord back together. White knows this. Everyone in the room knows this. They make a clean, precise cut, knowing full well that the connection to the body below will be lost forever. The head is now free. For a few moments it exists as a separate entity, kept alive only by the cold and the whirring machines that pump blood through it. Then you see them lift it, ever so gently, and move it to its new home. Now, picture the recovery room. The air is still and quiet. The only sound is the rhythmic beep of a monitor. The procedure is over. On a surgical table lies a single rhesus monkey, but your eyes are drawn to the neat line of sutures around its neck. The head of one monkey now sits upon the body of another. For a long time there is nothing, just the silent, unsettling form of the composite creature. The team watches, you watch, waiting for any sign that the brain inside that head has survived the journey. Then its eyelids flutter. Slowly the monkey wakes up. Its eyes, dark and confused, begin to dart around the room. They follow the movements of Dr. White as he steps closer. The brain is clearly working. It is conscious and aware. A researcher holds a piece of fruit near its mouth, and the monkey's jaw moves. It chews, and it even appears to taste the food. You can see the flicker of recognition, of instinct, playing out in a mind that is now utterly disconnected from the body it inhabits. In a very specific and very horrifying way, the experiment is a success. Dr. White has proven that a primate's head can be transplanted and kept alive. But here is the thing. The success is overshadowed by a profound and unavoidable failure. You watch the monkey's eyes, so full of life and awareness, and then you look down at the body. It is perfectly still. The arms and legs are limp and motionless. The severed spinal cord means that no signals from the brain can reach the rest of the body. The monkey is paralyzed from the neck down. It is a conscious mind trapped inside a prison, a thinking, feeling being that cannot move, cannot scratch an itch, cannot run. It can only watch. Years later, a neuroscientist named Dr. Jerry Silver would recall seeing a film of the experiment, describing his absolute horror at the sight. He saw the frustration and the rage in the monkey's facial expressions. It was a truly awful thing to witness. The creature survived for 9 days. For 9 days, its brain lived on, perceiving the world from its new, motionless body. Eventually, due to complications with the foreign tissue and the inevitable rejection process, the monkey died. The experiment was over, but the questions it raised were only just beginning. White had kept a brain alive, but what kind of life had he created? The news of Dr. White's monkey head transplant did not stay within the confines of the scientific community. When the details of the 1970 experiment reached the public, it ignited an ethical firestorm. Imagine the newspaper headlines, the television reports. In the Soviet Union, Demikhov's work had been state-sponsored and largely shielded from public debate. But in America, the reaction was swift and furious. You are now in the midst of a society grappling with this shocking new reality. The public outcry was immense, far greater than anything Demikhov had ever faced. For many people, this was not science, it was a ghoulish act of cruelty. Animal rights groups were understandably horrified. But the criticism also came from within the scientific establishment itself. Fellow doctors and researchers questioned the ethics of the procedure. You hear their arguments echo in the news. They asked, what was the point of creating a creature that was aware but completely paralyzed? Was this a legitimate step towards helping humans, or was it a step too far, an experiment driven more by ambition than by compassion? The human impact was one of moral revulsion for a large part of the population. Dr. White was forced to defend his work in the court of public opinion. He argued passionately for his belief. He insisted that he was working to one day save people with catastrophic spinal cord injuries, to give a thinking person a new lease on life with a healthy donor body. You can imagine him, a man of science, trying to explain his complex motivations to a world that saw only a monster. He believed the brain was the person, and he had saved the person. But his critics saw it differently. They saw a tormented animal, a life of consciousness trapped in a state of living death. In the end, the controversy defined the rest of his career. He never did get to perform a human head transplant, though he wanted to. The ethical and social barriers were simply too high. His work serves as a powerful reminder of a simple truth. Science doesn't happen in a vacuum. What might be technically possible can be ethically unthinkable. So next time you consider the incredible advances of modern medicine, remember Dr. White and his monkey. They represent a boundary, a line drawn not by what we can do, but by what we should do. It's a question that science alone can never answer for us. Welcome to the final chapter of our story. In the labs of the Soviet Union and America, you've seen heads kept alive by machines. You've witnessed two-headed dogs and monkeys with transplanted heads. It feels like a parade of horrors, a gallery of macabre curiosities. The air in these memories is thick with the metallic scent of blood and the low hum of experimental equipment. You might feel a profound sense of unease, a feeling that these men went too far. But here's the thing. The legacy of these experiments is not confined to dusty, forgotten laboratories. Its roots have spread, twisting through the history of medicine to emerge in a place you might never expect, the modern operating theatre. This is the story of how monsters, or men who acted like them, gave birth to miracles. It's the early 1960s, a time of great tension and scientific rivalry. You are a brilliant and ambitious young surgeon from South Africa, a man named Christiaan Barnard. In your mind, you hold a revolutionary idea, a concept so bold it borders on blasphemy. The notion of transplanting a human heart. Your colleagues think it's impossible, a medical fantasy. They say the body would reject the organ, that the surgical challenge is too great. But you've heard whispers, stories coming out of the Soviet Union, stories about a man named Vladimir Demikhov. So, you decide to see for yourself. You travel to Moscow, a journey into the heart of the world's other superpower. In 1960, you step into Demikhov's laboratory for the first time. The room is probably cold, the smell of antiseptic failing to cover the underlying scent of the kennels. You are a guest, an observer from a different world, standing on the chilling frontier of science. You watch Demikhov and his team work. You see their incredible skill in vascular surgery, their ability to connect tiny blood vessels with a speed and precision that seems almost inhuman. And then you see them, the living results of his work, the two-headed dogs. For most, the sight is one of pure body horror. But for you, for Christiaan Barnard, it is a revelation. You see past the grotesque surface. You understand that if Demikhov can sustain a second head, he has solved the fundamental problems of supplying a transplanted organ with blood. You are so convinced by what you see that you return for a second visit in 1963. You spend more time in that stark, functional laboratory. You're not just watching anymore, you are learning. The texture of the surgical thread, the specific techniques for suturing, the methods for preventing blood clots. You absorb it all. You realize that Demikhov, this controversial Soviet scientist, has already built the surgical roadmap. His work with dogs, as disturbing as it is, proves that transplantation is not a fantasy. It is a technical problem that he has already solved. The human impact of this moment is immense, though no one knows it yet. You carry this knowledge, this grim and essential education, back home with you. It becomes the foundation upon which your own legend will be built. Years pass. The world watches in amazement on December 3rd, 1967. In a hospital in Cape Town, you, Christiaan Barnard, perform the world's first successful human-to-human heart transplant. It is a landmark achievement, a moment that changes medicine forever. And when the world asks you how, you do not hesitate. You give credit to the man in the Moscow lab. You write letters and give speeches. In one, many years later, you would state plainly that if there is a father of heart and lung transplantation, then Demikhov certainly deserves this title. Imagine the weight of that. The procedure that has saved countless lives, the very symbol of medical progress, owes its existence to experiments that produced two-headed dogs. It's an uncomfortable truth. The knowledge was born from a place of deep animal suffering, a fact that complicates the legacy of everyone involved. Now, Let's fast forward through the decades. The world gets used to the idea of heart, lung, and kidney transplants. They become difficult but established parts of medicine. The work of Demikhov and the controversy of White's monkey experiment seem to fade into history. They become footnotes for medical students. But the central, unanswered question lingered in the background, a ghost in the machine of progress, the question of the brain. The problem that White could not solve, the severed spinal cord. For decades it seemed like an absolute barrier, an impossible dream. And then, in the 2010s, the ghost returned. It's the age of the internet and social media. In this new world, an Italian neurosurgeon named Dr. Sergio Canavero steps into the spotlight. He announces a project with a bold, almost cinematic name, HAVE, which stood for Head Anastomosis Venture. His goal was not just to transplant a head, but to perform what he called a cephalic exchange on a living human being. He wasn't working in a secret Soviet lab. He was posting on the internet, giving TED Talks, and speaking to news agencies. He even had a volunteer, a Russian computer scientist named Valery Spiridonov, a man whose body was being destroyed by a terminal muscle wasting disease. For him, this wasn't a scientific curiosity, it was his last and only hope. Canavero's proposed plan was a mix of old ideas and new unproven technologies. Imagine you are the patient, Valerie. The first step, they tell you, is profound hypothermia. Your head would be cooled to around 10 degrees Celsius. This is a technique taken directly from Robert White's 1970s monkey experiment. The cold, they hope, will protect your brain, slowing its metabolism to a crawl so it can survive without oxygen while they work. The chill would seep into you, an artificial winter designed to preserve the spark of your consciousness. The human cost is immense. You are putting your life, your very identity, into the hands of a theory that began with a monkey strapped to a table almost half a century ago. The next part of the proposed surgery is the cut itself. You are told this is the most critical mechanical step. Canavero didn't just talk about a scalpel. He insisted on the need for an ultra-sharp blade, a nanoblade, to make what he called a perfectly clean cut through your spinal cord and the donors. The idea was that a cleaner severance would make reconnection easier. The feeling of that concept is sharp and cold, a line being drawn between your mind and your failing body. This was a step beyond White, who simply severed the cord. Canavero was planning for a future where that same cord could be fused back together. But how? That was the billion-dollar question, the problem that had made all previous efforts fail. And here, Canavero announced his most controversial claim, what he called the magic ingredient, the solution to the riddle of the spinal cord. He believed he could fuse the two severed ends using a chemical called polyethylene glycol, or PEG. You can think of it as a kind of biological glue. The theory was that this fusogen could repair the damaged cell membranes of the nerves, the axons, encouraging them to connect and grow together. This was the key. If it worked, it meant your brain could one day speak to your new body. If it failed, you would be left exactly like Robert White's monkeys, conscious, aware, but trapped in a body you could not move or feel, a prisoner inside your own skull for the rest of your short life. The global scientific community reacted with overwhelming force. The reaction was not one of excitement, but of condemnation. Canavero was not publishing his work in peer-reviewed journals, the traditional way scientists check and validate each other's work. Instead, he was making grand announcements to the press. He claimed he had successfully performed the procedure on a monkey, which was left paralyzed and died in less than a day. He claimed he had done a rehearsal on 2 human cadavers. This approach led to widespread accusations that he was practicing science by press release, chasing headlines instead of rigorous proof. It was a firestorm of controversy, amplified by the speed of 21st century media. Prominent bioethicists and neuroscientists lined up to dismiss the project. Dr. Arthur Kaplan, a leading voice in medical ethics, called the project unethical and fake news. He pointed to the immense cost, an estimated $11 to $13 million, and he raised a critical point about the human impact. A healthy donor body, which would be used for your single transplant, could have saved up to 8 other lives through conventional organ donation. And perhaps most disturbingly, the same Dr. Jerry Silver, who had been horrified by White's monkey experiment decades earlier, called Canavero's plan bad science. He saw it as a modern echo of a past he desperately wanted to forget, a stunt that ignored the profound and unknowable psychological trauma a person would face. So where does this leave us? You've journeyed from the 1920s to the modern day. You've seen isolated dog heads, two-headed dogs, transplanted monkey heads, and the proposal for a human one. It becomes a blur of unsettling images. We can see the progression clearly. In the 1920s, you had Sergei Brukhanenko with his autojector machine, trying to understand basic organ physiology. Then in the 1950s, Demikhov used his mastery of surgery to pioneer the very idea of organ transplantation, even if his subjects were chimeras. By the 1970s, you see Robert White using cerebral hypothermia, pushing the science forward to focus on keeping the brain alive, hoping to help paralyzed people. Finally, in our own time, Canavero proposed using fusogens like Peak, each man built on the work of the last, adding a new piece of technology to the puzzle. But through all of it, the ethical questions remain exactly the same. Was it right? Were these men monsters, driven by ego and a callous disregard for life? Or were they visionaries, pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the only way they knew how? The truth is, they were likely a little of both. They were brilliant surgeons and scientists. They were also men who inflicted tremendous suffering in the name of progress. Demikhov's work led directly to life-saving heart transplants, a debt the first heart transplant surgeon himself acknowledged. White's work on brain cooling is still relevant in modern surgery. Their goals, at least on paper, were often noble: to cure paralysis, to conquer terminal illness. And yet, the feeling that lingers is one of profound discomfort. The knowledge we have today, the techniques that save your friends and family in a hospital, did not always come from a clean, well-lit place. Some of it was born in cold, dark labs, surrounded by the sounds of suffering animals. The story of head transplantation is not just about a few strange experiments. It is about the uncomfortable reality of scientific progress itself. It reminds us that the line between a monster and a pioneer can sometimes be blurry. And it leaves you with one final, unsettling thought. Next time you hear about a medical miracle, a life-saving organ transplant, you can be thankful. But you might also remember the strange and terrible journey that it took to get there, a journey built on the shoulders of two-headed dogs and monkeys with the bodies of strangers. And so, the whirring of the autojector fades into silence. The lights in the operating theatres of Moscow and Cleveland have gone dark, leaving behind the profound and unsettling quiet that follows a bold transgression against nature. We've witnessed the grim determination of Demikhov and White, men who chased a vision of scientific mastery, leaving a legacy of both miracles and monsters in their wake. As you begin to settle into the stillness of your room, perhaps you can still sense the cold, sterile air of the laboratory, a silent moment of anticipation before the horrifying success of the two-headed dog or the tragic awakening of the monkey. Thank you for finding this quiet space to confront this difficult history with me. It's a strange comfort to know we've stood witness to these events together. The case file on these experiments is now complete and ready to be sealed in the archives. But the record is not truly finished without the mark of those who bore witness. Consider alike your official signature on the observation log, pressed into the cover of this classified file, authenticating the challenging history you've just reviewed. And to subscribe, that is, to file a standing request with the archivist, and you have every new declassified file delivered to you personally the moment its contents are cleared for viewing. It is the only way to ensure no story from the shadow of science is ever lost to you. For now, let the sound of my voice become a distant echo. The lab is sealed for the night. The scalpels have been cleaned. The subjects are finally at rest. There is nothing more to dissect, nothing more to debate. Just allow the stillness to settle over you and drift into a deep and peaceful sleep. The story of what we gained and what was lost will be here, a silent memory when you return. Good night.